Welcome to Mirror Movement Monday. I'm excited today. We have a guest in our studio. Our guest for this Mirror Movement Monday is Sandra Willoughby. She is psychotherapist and owner of the Riverside Counseling Clinic here in Eau Claire. Welcome, Sandra. I'm so glad you could be here today.
Thanks, Sandra.
So we're going to start off, if you wouldn't mind telling me just a little bit about your background as a therapist and what led you down this path.
Okay. Well, when I think about what led me down this path, and people ask me that quite often, I always start with a story about when I was in 13, probably in about 8th grade, in junior high, right. And I had to go to my guidance counselor because they were doing, what are you going to do with school and careers and things like that. And so I went in and I was very, very, very nervous because I knew I wanted to be an actress.
Really?
I did.
An actress?
/ movie star. Okay, I wanted the whole thing. Seriously.
So we've gone from movie star to therapist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I went in and I was very nervous, and it was a man, and I decided just to take the risk because, I should be able to do whatever I want. And so I said to him that this is what I want to do when I grow up. And he looked at me and just said, well, that's ridiculous.
Oh, no.
And I still remember that moment of taking that risk and putting myself out there and just being kind of squashed down and told, no, you can't do that. And so when I think back to that and when I think about choosing a career, I decided then I want to do what he does because I want it to be different with, if I see young people or I try to counsel people, to never tell them, no, you can't do it, but to help people take their goals, take their dreams, and help them develop them. So that was an important moment for me in terms of that. Fast forward about 20 years. I spent my early adulthood, I got married, had 2 kids, I was at home with them, which I loved. I'm so glad I was able to do that through my 20s. But then my younger one started school, and so I was in my early 30s by then, and again decided, okay, now it might be time to look at a career, because I had never really done that. So I decided, again, going back to that initial urge to want to counsel people, and decided to go back to school. I was living here in Eau Claire at the time, so I went to UW Eau Claire and got my bachelor's degree in social work. And during the time that I was at Eau Claire, I started working at Bolton Refuge House. So that was kind of my first job, so to speak, and decided that, I kind of wanted to test myself to make sure that I could do the work and work with women. I wanted to work with women, but not take it home, because that's such an important thing in what I do. And so I worked there. I was mentored by Ann McKinley, who is still around the area, and taught a lot about working with women and about domestic violence and about sexual assault. So it was a really good learning place for me.
Right.
And really got a lot of joy out of doing that. And actually then I went on to grad school at University of Minnesota to get my master's and continued working and doing workshops with Bolton Refuge House for kind of all through those years that I was in school. So my dream to work with women then took a little detour when I got into grad school, and after finishing grad school needed to have a job because as a clinical social worker you have to have so many hours of supervised practice to get licensed.
Sure,
so it's like adding 2 years on to your schooling. And I was hired as the coordinator of a new day treatment program in Mondovi for delinquent youth.
Oh boy.
So I went from working with women to working with adolescents who had pretty significant problems in school, and most of them were in foster care. And coordinated and was a case manager and therapist for that program for a couple of years while I got my hours. And so it was something that I never thought I would be doing, is working with these kids, but man, I learned a lot from them.
I imagine.
And talk about, really learning about families and getting the sense of what families are. And the strengths of the foster care system that we have around here is pretty remarkable. There's some real dedicated people. So did that. But after 2 years, I was kind of done.
I can imagine. That would be difficult not to take that home.
Again, when I talk to younger people who want to go into the field or become a therapist, and I always encourage them to get some volunteer work, to get some experience, again, just to make sure that they do have the ability to have boundaries about that.
Right.
And if they can't, there's nothing wrong with that, but they may want to rethink what they're doing with their career choice.
Right.
After that, I was at a couple of different clinics. I was at Omni Clinic for several years as a therapist, started doing eating disorder treatment as a specialty during those years. And then in 2005, decided to take the jump into private practice, which was really scary, and started my own business, which was really scary.
I believe me, I understand.
Yeah, I'm sure you do, and have never regretted it. It's just, it's been fulfilling on a whole nother level. So
wonderful.
Right.
Well, here you are.
And here I am.
That's
still
fantastic.
Doing it. Yeah.
So tell me what you love most about being a therapist. What's your favorite thing about what you do?
I think my favorite thing is listening to people's stories. You know, again, people come into therapy often in crisis or in some kind of pain, and oftentimes needing someone to listen to their stories. And oftentimes it goes back into their lives and stories that they've never shared with anyone before. And so, you know, it's just very heartwarming, and I feel like it's a privilege to be able to listen to the stories that people need to tell about their lives. So that's the one part. Of course, the second part of that is then watching people change and watching people grow and feel stronger. You know, those two pieces all together, it's just heartwarming for me to be a part of that.
Oh, wonderful. So I'm always amazed at how many beautiful, amazing women I know. They're women of all ages, from their teens all the way through their 70s or however old you want to get to, who seem to struggle with self-esteem. We seem to be so hard on ourselves.
Right.
What is your perspective on why this seems to be such an epidemic? Why is this so common for women? Why are we so hard on ourselves and always seeming to focus on our flaws?
Well, it's a big question.
I know it's a big question. If you have the answer to this, wow. I tell you.
It's so true.
It's crazy.
Well, and I think oftentimes when, you know, looking at the issue of self-esteem in women, it's really easy to blame society and blame the media and all of that. And of course, that's part of it. But I also think too, it's often family history, depending on how we're raised, depending on what happens to us when we are growing up. Again, not looking necessarily at really super bad things in families, but pretty normal families. But you know, you just pick up messages often that aren't even said out loud to you. And then you add to that the influence of society growing up as a girl. And, you know, all the little friendship things that happen, and then you get into middle school and you have a lot of drama, girl things that happen. I have so many adolescent girls that come in and they'll track back to middle school and even bullying that goes on.
Really?
So, you know, that's another thing that obviously contributes. And then I think as women get older and start picking up so much of who they are based on how men talk to them or whether or not men are attracted to them, and get caught up into that as well. And so it all comes together. Again, oftentimes what I notice with women who come into therapy and who are willing to start looking at the core of that and really wanting to change that is getting down to this core belief of I'm not good enough. And again, oftentimes that goes back pretty far. And what happens then is once that's a deep belief, I'm not good enough, is that you walk around in the world and that's the lens that you look at things through.
Absolutely.
You know, oh, well, this happened because I'm not good enough, or this person doesn't like me because I'm not good enough, or I didn't get that job because I'm not good enough. And so to me, the belief of I'm not good enough is that core of low self-esteem.
So how would you recommend that we change that perspective? I mean, rather than looking at it as I'm not good enough, how would you coach someone to maybe look at that differently, or how do you go about that process?
Well, I think, again, that speaks to the process of therapy. I mean, on a very basic level, if you're going to challenge a belief, you need to cognitively challenge the belief. You know, it's all about being able to change the message inside and do sort of a reverse brainwashing again, because that core belief of I'm not good enough has come from so many different places, and oftentimes it's been around for many, many years. And so to be able to change that and challenge that, you have to work on cognitively using affirmations. I tell a lot of women to come up with mantras.
Really?
Just short phrases that they can remind themselves constantly that they are good enough, and just to build that back up. But the other piece of it, and I think another important piece of it, is for women to learn to trust their own emotions. Because again, a lot of times perceptions get all messed up, because you can be in a situation and have feelings about what's going on. Like, for example, you could have an argument, you could say to somebody that, I'm really mad, and they'll say, well, no, you're not, or you shouldn't be, or don't feel.
Right.
And then getting to the place where you don't trust your own feelings,
Right.
which means you don't trust yourself.
That's so true. You hear frequently, well, you shouldn't feel that way.
Exactly.
I don't know why you feel that way. You shouldn't feel that way.
Exactly.
Well, okay. What's wrong with me?
Right.
So,
What's wrong with me then is what goes along with that. So a lot of therapy then, when addressing those kinds of core issues, is tons of validation. Where women will come into therapy and they'll talk about situations in their lives and be able to talk about their perceptions, and then thinking that they're wrong, but then having an outside person validate them is huge. It's like, really? You mean I'm right about that? And it's like, yeah. And so again, you just start gradually building that self-confidence and trust that can help somebody feel better about themselves.
Trust in their self.
Exactly, right.
In your email to me, you had mentioned creating an environment that allows people to become more real. So as we're talking about perceptions and such, how do you accomplish this? How do we become more real with ourselves?
Well, what I was talking about in terms of the environment, again, of therapy, is I've always kept in my mind, I had a class in grad school, and the professor was teaching us about the concept of a holding environment, and to be able to make a therapy setting a holding environment. So if you kind of think about like a fragile being or tiny bird or something, and you think of a holding environment, you want to be able to contain that fragile self so that it can begin to get stronger and kind of grow up and leave. And so, again, to me, because so many people who come into therapy, they're fragile.
Sure, that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, whether they're in crisis or just life has piled up on them or whatever, it's important to me to provide that space for them. And it goes obviously back to the physical space being comfortable and being private and being safe. But it also speaks to the relationship, because as human beings, we heal within relationship with others. And so the therapeutic relationship becomes a holding environment so that a person can take risk. Again, I'm going to tell you my story. I've never told anybody before.
Right. Scary in and of itself.
Scary in and of itself. I'm going to tell you how I feel about this situation, even though I've always been told I was wrong. And so as they start taking risks and get its validation and validation and validation, then they get stronger within the environment. So it's several factors that come into that.
You also talk about building your authentic self. Can you tell me what you mean by that?
Well, again, it's kind of putting together everything we've already been talking about, which gets into trusting yourself. And so through the process of changing the belief system and changing the way you think about yourself and validating your emotional self, that you can trust your feelings, that they just are what they are. And so an authentic self to me is connecting all those dots. That you get to a point where it's all working together. And so therefore, if you have a major decision to make, for example, a woman who's in a marriage and she's not happy or it's abusive or she needs to get out, and comes in feeling very unsure of herself and not sure what she thinks because she's been given messages from her husband or other people.
Right.
And doubts that. And so through the process of getting stronger and all those dots connecting, okay, this is what I think, this is what I believe, this is how I feel, and then the bottom part, and this is what I deserve. That is somebody functioning on all different cylinders, and then I think can make better decisions for themselves.
Wonderful. That makes perfect sense. So, the Mirror Movement's mission is to help women change their or our perspectives of ourselves. What tips can you give to women on how best to accomplish this task?
And again, I know I sound like kind of like a broken record.
No, you don't. No, we need to keep hearing it over and over.
Over and over and over. Yeah,
Until it
that's
sinks
that
in.
brainwashing.
See,
part,
right? It needs to sink in.
Exactly. Again, I think to work on positive thinking. I can't say enough about positive thinking.
And that you have to do that consciously.
And constantly.
Yes.
And as cliche as it is, it's so important to be able to get into the positive thinking.
Yes.
That's one thing. I think second, again, is to learn to identify your feelings and express them appropriately and feel confident in what you're feeling. All your feelings, the good ones and the bad ones. And I think the third thing too for women is, like what I think you're trying to do, Angela, is to find communities of women who can support you.
Yes.
Whether it's friendships or family or work or, wherever.
Right.
I think for women to come together and support each other and validate,
Right.
there's a validation piece again too.
Right.
I think too often women end up in competition with each other.
That is so true.
And we
yes.
work against
We do.
ourselves as women, truly.
Yeah.
So I think the community piece is important too.
And I think, when you say providing that community of women, just to remind each other, to have that support, to say, wait a minute, stop talking that way about yourself. That's not true, remember?
Yeah, right.
So,
right.
Wonderful. So if you could leave all women or everybody with one piece of advice today, what would it be? That's a big one, I know. You can only pick one.
Only one. Okay, let's see. Which one do I want? Honestly, I think with that, when I think of myself, and now I'm in my mid-50s, so I've learned a lot, is the one piece of advice I would say is create joy in your life and laugh and have laughter. Because we as women work so hard and we put so much pressure on ourselves to be the perfect mother and wife and friend and daughter and employee, and so much pressure on ourselves. And I think in today's society that's gotten to be so much more pressure to do everything well and do everything perfectly and forget to have fun. And when I just make such a point now of spending time with my girlfriends, and I have fun girlfriends, and we laugh and make jokes and have a good time, and I just think that that's vital for women to be able to do that.
I couldn't agree
So
more.
add joy.
Good. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such an honor to meet you and to have you here. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Angela.
If you'd like to learn more about Riverside Counseling Clinic or schedule an appointment with Sandra, you can visit her website at www.riversidecounselingclinic.com. Thank you for watching this episode of Mirror Movement Monday, where we're working together to change our perspectives one woman at a time.